Group. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome to the tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about if statements and while loops. We have been doing a lot of that this week, so it might not take as long as I had originally planned. But if we have enough time, we might even get into arrays and start with arrays. So the first thing, I've been getting a lot of DMs from students complaining about them not being marked because of the wrong Visual Studio's solution. We have discussed this more than once, so this is going to be the last time I am going to be discussing this with you. In future, our practicals, our tutorials are going to have a lot of information in them to a point where I cannot fill in the creation of a Visual Basic application along with all of the content. At this point, we don't have that much context, so I can do this. So this is how you create a Visual Studio's 2022 solution. Create a new program, and as it's loading, the one that you want, most of you, the reason why your practical is not being marked is because you're choosing this one that says Windows Form Apps. Is this the right solution that you're supposed to be creating? No, it is not. And the reason why how you can tell is if you double click on it and click on next, you'll see that, does not matter what I name it, you'll see that if I click on next again, what framework is this solution using? It's using Framework 6.0. Framework 6.0 does not support the UJ grid, amongst other things. And as it says, long-term support, they are still tweaking some issues with this version of .NET. So that's not the version of .NET you want to be using. The correct version of .NET is you go back again, and if you scroll down on the options that you have, you will eventually run into Windows Form Apps with .NET Framework in brackets. That is the one you need to choose. If you choose the other one, the first Windows Form Apps without the .NET, and then you get to the practical and the assistant cannot open it, they will not mark it. And the fault will be yours for creating the wrong type of solution. So again, Windows Form App with .NET Framework, click on next, and the naming convention. This is another problem that some of you still have. How many of you name your practicals like this? How many of you do that? Okay, that is incorrect. So in the practical question paper, when it says the S curly brace student number, the curly braces are indications of remove the student number and put in your own student number. You would have noticed that when you try and submit it, it changes the name to something like S7B or something like that. If you are lucky enough, all it does is change the name. You're going to get less marks for the name, but it might still open and it might still execute. If you are unlucky, it won't execute at all because Visual Studios is trying to convert those curly little braces into something it understands. So in future, you don't need to include those curly braces. They are not supposed to be part of your practical name. So just leave it as S student number and the rest of the naming convention. Does that make sense? Okay, so for this one, I'll just call it Thursday TUT 1003. I'll keep it on my desktop, it's fine, then create. Then the .NET Framework version is also 4.7.2. You can have 4.7.3. It's not an issue as long as you chose the Windows Form Apps with .NET Framework in brackets. Okay, so finally, after you did all of that, this is what your form looks like. All right, I'm just gonna close that. So the first thing you do is now everyone in attendance knows which solution files to create, or which type of solution to create. We all know how to name our project correctly. Third thing is, the first thing you're going to do when you create your form or when you create your solution is change your form name, which is going to lead to an error. Okay, let's do that. First thing, right click properties. This is text. I'm gonna call it number edition because we're doing last week's code. And the name, of it should be what? What should the name of my form be? It should start with the prefix FRM and whatever else I want to name it. So I can name it FRM add. And then now I've changed both the name property and the text property of this form. So first thing you do is you try and run it. And the first time you try and run it, it's going to give you an error. This is because this is another error in .NET Framework that Microsoft haven't gotten around to solving. It changes the name of the form, but everywhere besides the designer. So at this point, if you click on no, the error at the bottom says Form 1 is not a member of Thursday tutorial 10.10.03. What does that mean? Do I have a component in my program called Form 1? No, I don't. I have one called Form Add. But for some reason in the designer, it's still called Form 1. So how do you solve this issue? You double click on the error and the error will take you to the designer where you can update that name. I had an issue in Tuesday's tutorial where when you double click, ladies and gentlemen, double click on anything besides the code. Okay, because if you double click on the code, what then happens is Visual Studios will open a web page where they're kind of telling you what the error is. It's not what you need. Half of you can't even read that much. And this is a lot of information for you guys to take in. I've read this, and after reading this, I still did not understand what the error was. So avoid clicking on the error message and just click on the description itself, double click on the description. It should open the application.designer page. Once application.designer is open, there is the little red squiggly line. And the reason for that is it still says Form 1. We have changed our form from Form 1 to FRM add. So you change it to FRM add as well. And that error should disappear. Once that red little squiggly line has disappeared, save everything, not save, save all and close the design. Once you've done that, try running the program again to ensure that you have indeed rectified that error. If it executes like it has done now, just drag it from the other page, then you know everything is all right. Now you can effectively start coding. Good. So are there any questions online and in person? Are there any questions with what we've covered so far? What type of Visual Basic application to create, what to name your solutions, and how to deal with the error with the form name? No questions. Okay, moving on. So now I can effectively start coding. First thing I want to do is view code. And the first thing I'm going to do is add my option statements. So once I have my option statements, I can effectively go back to my form and put the controls on my form. So I am going to need a label. Says how many numbers. Do I have to change my label's name? Can I change my label's name? If I wanted to change my label's name, what would be the prefix? LBL. Is it a must for me to change it? Why not? I never call labels in the backend, so it doesn't really matter what their names are at this point in time. So you can leave it as just label 1. It's not a train smash. And then I'm going to need a text box that's going to accommodate the information from the user. This text box properties. Should I edit the text property of a text box? No, why not? Because I use it as an input device, right? So I don't change the text. What I do change is the name. The reason for the changing of the name is because I do refer to the text box in the back end, and instead of it just being text box 1, I would like to give it a descriptive name so I know what it correlates to. So this will be txt numbers or txt num numbers. Good. Then I'm going to have a button. That's going to initialize the information I've given. No, that's wrong. Button initialize, and then the text is what I need to change next. And I've got initialize. Okay, so ideally the information I'm going to get here is from the user. I'm going to ask them how many numbers they want to add. They'll tell me how many numbers they want to add, then I'll click on the button to store that information that has been given to me, right? Then have another one, label. And this one shall say properties. Please enter values. Leave it at that. I will need a text box for that as well. And properties, I'm going to change the name property of it, call it txt values, and I'll have a button. Call it btn add, and change the text on there to add value, and I can finally have a text box. And I'll have a reset button, and my text will be text will be reset. Okay, so I don't need all of that extra space. Is there anything else I need as far as the question that we've been dealing with last week is concerned? So again, the question is, I want to know how many numbers I want to add, and then I'm going to keep on giving those numbers until I get a sum. So is there anything else I need on my form? Yes, no, maybe. Okay, so I'm just going to make my form a little bit smaller. And I don't think I changed the name of this. No, I did not. It still says text box 1. So this will be txt output. Okay, so let's try run it again, see if we haven't broken anything. And there we go. It runs. I can enter information there, I can enter information there, I can enter information there. Should I be allowed to enter information in here? No, it should be an output. So what you can do, you don't have to, but what you can do is, no, I pressed the wrong button. So what you can do is go to the properties for this text box and change the read only from false to true. And what that does is it grays it out so that no information can be given to that text box. Okay, so let's start writing code. The first thing I want is to, in my initialize button, I can't necessarily start writing code because I don't have variables. So variables I need uh, any other variables I need. So I generally tend to, we're going to have more and more variables. This way of doing it is kind of easier, makes it easier for you to understand. So over here, I've got my variables, but firstly, I've got my input and output variables. So I know those ones that are declared first are either going to be my input variables or my output variables. Then I have my other category where these are all the other variables I'm going to need. So for instance, numbers, what is that? Is it an input or an output? Input, right? Value, input or output? Input. Sum, output. So this can correlate to your design as well. So in your design, remember you have inputs and outputs and you have variables. So if you're grouping them in the same groups, it kind of makes it easier. Is there any other variable I need at this point in time? Anyone else have an extra variable? No. Okay. So the first thing I want to do in my initialize button is get whatever value the user has given me and store it in numbers, right? Okay. After getting that, I need to initialize my program. So I'm going to say okay, this was in the code from last week as well. What is the reason behind us putting that initialization code in a separate button? Is there a reason why we would put that information in a separate button? Why can't we just initialize it in the add button? Yes. I do it too. I didn't hear what you said. Okay. Not do the rest of the sum. Okay. Her point is different to mine. So her reasoning is a separation of concerns. Okay. So her reasoning is we have one button to initialize and we have one button to add. So there is no reason to have one button for both of them. We are separating the bits and pieces of coding into different buttons, which she is correct. In that case, if something goes wrong as I'm pressing initialize, does that mean there's something wrong with my adding code? No. But if it's all in one button and I press that button and it crashes, do I know which part is not working? No, I don't. So whenever you can separate your events and actions, try and do that. But that's not the biggest reason why we're doing it in this instance. Okay, we'll get to that. Yeah. Okay, so if I had to put that code in the add button, it would reset my information each and every time I press the button, which is something we don't want. Okay, I'll show you an example of that, of what I mean by that. But okay, as far as this, one thing I can also do is but let's see if that works. You don't have to do line 14, by the way. It's just, so if I said in numbers and I press initialize, so basically what it does is it stores 10 in numbers and it's kind of nullified that text box so that I can no longer edit this information. What I need to, should I be able to edit that information? Should I be able to change the number of numbers? No. Why should I be able to change the number of numbers? So if I say I want to add 5 numbers, and I start adding the first number, second number, third number, can I decide after adding the third number that I no longer want 5, I want 10? No, because if I say I want 5, I should be able to add all those 5s and get my sum, which is why after saying 10, I have stopped the user from changing this until they add all of the information and get their sum. Only when they reset the program should they be allowed to say how many numbers they want to add. Does that make sense? Okay. So questions with the initialization button code. So basically code 14 is just, line 14 is just turning the read-only property of the text box on so that there can be no input given to that text box. Cool, let's move on to our add button. So in our add button, let me just check. I have the code open somewhere. Okay, I have to check. The first thing I have to check is check if my counter is less than numbers, right? Remember that part? So if my counter is less than my numbers, then I need to get value. Value is by value of values. What is the value is equal to convert to integer txt values dot text. Do you see how easy naming your text boxes to correlate with the variable makes things? Because over there I've got numbers is equal to txt numbers dot text, and values is equal to txt values dot text. We can kind of see the correlation between the two. So after getting that, I can simply say counter plus equal 1. So counter plus equal 1 is shorthand for saying counter is equal to counter plus 1. Okay. Then from increasing my counter, I can say sum is equal to sum plus 1. I could still say sum plus equal 1, but I'm just going to show you the two, that both those things do the same thing. Okay, and from there, we would have another if statement. If counter is equal to numbers, then txt is txt output dot text is equal to and over here, once if you click on the button again and counter is no longer equal to numbers, we would like to have an else where we have txt output dot text is equal to okay. There shouldn't be any questions with this code. I think we've dealt with it on Monday and on Wednesday as well. It's a version of the one that you have in the slides. Not necessarily the same, because I'm not copying from there, I'm coding it from the top of my head. Yes. What? Line 23. Yes. Oh yes, you are correct. That is my bad. This should be value. You are correct. Okay, any other questions? No. Okay, let's see if it works. How many numbers? I want 3 numbers. Initialize those numbers. Enter the value. The first number is 1. Add value. Second number is 2. Add value. Third number is 3. Add value. And I've got the sum is 6. So if you add up 1, 2, and 3, your total is 6. If I click on the button again, it says you can't add any more numbers. The sum is 6. Okay, so if I keep on clicking on that, it won't change because our if statement is stopping it from doing so. Okay, are there any questions with this? What could I possibly do to make it a little more streamlined? A little more user-friendly? Anyone? Yeah. No, it's not, because if we go back, this is an event-driven coding language. So there needs to be an event that triggers some sort of reaction. So how we've been doing it is our button clicks are the events that trigger an action. So the only time something should happen ideally is if a button is clicked. But what I was talking about is we could just make it more user-friendly, prompt to add number. No, I don't think a prompt to add number is going to be user-friendly because, let's say, I've got doesn't matter what the name is. If I have a message box there that says add number, if anything, it makes it more irritating because if I say I've got 5 numbers, initialize, and then I say add, it says add number. Okay, cool. Oh, I didn't add anything, so it crashed. But do you see, every single time before I add a number, it's going to say add number. I know I need to add a number, so you don't need to keep on telling me I need to add a number. So that's not what I was talking about. Yeah, it becomes cumbersome as well because your button clicks become more because you need to dismiss that prompt. So it's not a very great idea. What I was talking about is along the lines of clearing that information. So we can say txt values dot text is equal to nothing. Okay, you think that's going to make our lives a little bit easier? So instead of having to delete the information and write new information in there, if I said again, I want 3 numbers initialized, and the first number is 1, when I say add value, it took in the 1, but it cleared the space so that I can put in the next number. You think that's a little bit better than just having to delete it and put it in yourself, right? Okay, so then I'll say second number is 2, Third number is 3. Your sum is 6. Reset does nothing. And if I click on that, it says you can't add any more, but the sum is 6. Yes, there's a hand. Now if you say 0, 0 is sum. So I still need to get rid of that 0 to put in a value. So rather keep it empty to allow the person to put in a value than 0. If you did 0, it would be better if it was a number input with an up and down scroll arrow to take it up or take it down. But nothing is more is better, because once there's nothing in there like there is now, you've got space to put in whatever you want. But it won't do anything with that information. But you get what I mean? At least when you press the button, it's also a show of what you are doing is working. So when the number disappears, it's kind of an idea of it's been taken out of the text box and put into the variable. Does that make sense? Okay. But we still have to press on the button quite a lot of times. Oh, one other thing we could do is, instead of doing this, I could just have a prompt. Okay, so something like that. And if I drag it from this side, drop it over here, 3, initialize, enter values, 1, add value, 2, add value, 3, add value, and it says the sum is 6, but next time you press on the button, it says you can't add any more values. Something we can make to kind of improve that is your message box has two parameters. You can put in the second parameter as warning. Come on, you should work. Okay, never mind that. That's the wrong thing. I'm thinking about something else. So yeah, let's just leave it at that. I don't have an else if. So I have an if over here, and I have an else and an end if. This if. Yeah. Does it need to have an else if? Is that your question? No, it doesn't. So an if statement is set up in such a way that you will do something if this condition is true. So if that condition is not true, it's not going to do anything. Only if you wanted to do something in the event that the first condition is not true, will you put in an else. So again, if you go back to the example I gave a few weeks ago of going to buy bread, right? You walk from home, go all the way to the store. Your guardian has told you, go buy brown bread. Have they given you any other information? They given you an alternative? No. So when you get to the store and there is no brown bread, what are you going to do? You're just going to go home, right? It's the same thing here. That if statement only caters for when counter is equal to num numbers. So it will only execute if counter is equal to num numbers. We don't care for when counter is bigger or less than. If that's the case, then that if statement is not going to run. So after the first if statement, it doesn't have an end if. See where line 25 is highlighted? Line 27 has that ifs end if. So the first if statement at line 20, that if statement's end if is at line 31. 31. So line 20 and line 31. Line 20 is the beginning, line 31 is the end. If you move it to, why would you want to move it to line 25? Okay, look at it this way. I am saying, if you have money, go to the store, right? The first condition, the first thing. And then when you get to the store, I'm like, if there's something you like, buy it. You understand that the second if statement that says, if you find something you like, buy it, is dependent on the first if statement that said, if you have money, go to the store. So in order for you to buy something that you like, you should have had gone to the store first. Okay, so you understand that this if statement is within that if statement. Same thing applies there. We want for as long as counter is less than numbers. Do you notice that inside that if statement we're increasing the value of counter? So we are saying if counter is less than numbers, execute this code. Increase counter by 1. After increasing counter by 1, check again whether counter is equal to numbers. And if it is, display it. If it's not, do nothing. So those two if statements are dependent on one another. You can ideally take it out. You can take it out, it would still work. I think the logic would still be the same. Let's see. Three, 1, 2. Wait, something weird happened. Oh, I didn't put in a value. So this is not the code crashing, that's just me being stupid. So 3, initialize, 1, 2, 3. Sum is 6. Still works, but it's just a bit better to just do it within the other if statement. But yeah, the logic is still the same. Okay, any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? So we spoke about while loops. So at the moment, you see how many times I have to click the button? It even makes me get to a point where I'm clicking the button without putting in an input. We don't want that to happen. So enter the while loop. So yesterday we did a while loop, this morning as well. Simply, we can just change that if statement to a while and end if to end while. Do this in class as well. So obviously the else doesn't like it because a while loop does not have an else. So I'll just simply comment that out and comment this message box out. And then this then shouldn't be there anyway. Is this going to work? Will this work? Who says yes? Show of hands. Who says no? Why won't it work? What is the reason behind you saying it won't work? You are looking at? Line 26. What about line 26? Because we no longer need it. Because line 26 will only execute if my condition is no longer true. And my while loop will stop running when my condition is no longer true. So it wouldn't run anyway. Are you also saying it won't work? Yeah, go ahead. Not really, no, we don't need that one access, so we can get rid of that one. So, does everyone understand why we don't need this if statement anymore? I know we did discuss this yesterday in class. Who says it won't work? No one. Or you just don't care to say you think it won't work? I think it won't work. Who's with me on that? Oh, so you guys think you know better than I do? Is that what you're saying? Let's see. Let me prove to you that my logic is undeniable. So same test data, 3. Initialize. That part still works. 1. Ooh. It's broken. This is the part where I say, I told you so. Why is it broken? Yes. Yeah, I'm still listening. It's still a condition in a while loop. A while loop also needs a condition. So you're going to do this while this is going on. So a while loop would be just like an if statement, where I say, if you are in first year, study. If you are in second year, study. If you are in third year, study. If you have graduated, there's no need for you to study, right? A while loop is equivalent, but instead of a while loop saying if 1, if 2, if 3, a while loop says for as long as you are registered, study. So the only time you're going to stop studying is when you're no longer registered. But both of them have a condition in order for them to run. So that's not the issue. Yes? You can only enter one value. Okay? Then the next, then you clear the OTC values to the text. When you clear that part, when you run the same count, it will crash because the value is no longer can be posted to the engine. Okay, did you know this before I ran the program? I just realized it now. You just figured it out now? Yeah. Okay. Did you get what that gentleman said? How many times does our code allow us to input data? How many times do we input value? Okay, so let's run it. Let's run it. I go while counter is less than num numbers. When I start off, what is the value of counter? What is the value of num numbers? 3. I mean, you usually use 3, right? So it will say value is equal to text box values.text. What is the value of txt values.text? It's usually 1, right? Okay. Then I store 1 in value. What do I do in the next line? I set the value of the text box to nothing. So there's nothing in the text box now. Then I increment counter plus 1, and then I add the value in value to sum. Now sum is going to be 0 plus 0 plus 1. So sum is 1. I get to end while. What happens after end while? Which line do I jump to from end while? I jump to line 20, right? Line 20 says, is counter less than num numbers? So counter now is currently 1. Num numbers is currently 3, right? So my condition is still true. So I go into the while loop, and it says value is equal to txt value.text. What is txt values text? At this point, what is txt values text? It's nothing, right? So then my code crashes because it cannot convert nothing into an integer. Simple way to solve this is just stop clearing my text. Is that going to solve my problem? Well, my code won't crash. So 3, initialize, 1, add value. Is that correct? What's the issue now? Yeah. Sorry? I still have to add 2 more numbers. Okay. But my sum is already 3. How's my sum 3 if I've only put in 1? Okay, so a while loop happens very fast. It runs super fast to a point where it does not give me enough time. I am not quick enough to change the number while the while loop is running. So we've got adding three ones at a time. Yes, that's what it's basically doing. It's using the same value and adding that value 3 times. So I can't. The nice thing about an if statement is it executed and it finished. It allowed me to change the value so that I can click the button and let it continue. Click the button, let it continue. But clicking the button was cumbersome. We all agreed that clicking the button over and over and over is something we don't want to do. So we got something that will not stop, will carry on until the condition is false, but now it's too quick for me. I cannot edit the number that's being given to the text box. How do I remedy this? What can I use to stop the while loop from running quicker than I can change the values in the text box? Anyone? Yeah. Try putting an input box. Okay, so simply put, what I can do to stop that is so once again, I've got 3 numbers initialized, and now I just add value. And it says, please enter the next value. Next value is 1. Please enter the next value is 2. Please enter the next value is 3. Sum is 6. So the nice thing about an input box is it stops the program until I give it an input. So can you use while loops with text boxes? No, it will always use the same value that's in that text box. So whenever you're working with while loops, you need to use input boxes. And input boxes are really fun to play around with. So I could say, please enter value We can actually make it more informative. So over here, run it again. Now I have 3 numbers initialized, first number, no, add. So now it's saying, please enter value 0 of 3. Okay, we tried being clever here. And 1 of 3, 2 of 3. That works. It is informative, it's just wrong. How can I fix this? How can I fix this code? Yes. Counter plus 1. Okay. So one way of fixing it, it's a long driver. What can I do with this code without changing or adding any more code? Or rather, yes, without adding any more code. How can I solve that issue without adding any more code? The answer lies in sequence, ladies and gentlemen. What can I do? Yes. So the simplest way to fix this issue is to put line 25 before line 22. So I increment counter by 1 before I use counter. Does that make sense? So the sequence matters in this instance. So I could have done what she asked me to do, but it would be doing it twice, because if I say counter plus 1 here, I'm also doing counter plus 1 at the bottom. So I already have a counter plus 1. Simply put, I just need to copy my counter plus 1, put it above my value input. And let's try run it again. And 3, initialize, add values. Now it says 1 of 3, which is 1, 2 of 3, 2, 3 of 3, 3. The sum is 6. Does that make sense? Good. So your sequence always matters. You need to look at where and when you're doing certain things. And if I click on that again, add value, I'm not getting my prompt. So I could, if I still want my prompt, I could keep this if statement still. But then that if statement, no, what did I just do? If I want my prompt, you cannot add any more values. Again, this is all about sequence, just making sure everything is in the right sequence. Okay, so now if I run it, if I click on the button again, I should get my prompt. Okay, questions? Are we all on the same page? Yes. This. Yes, what about line 25? Yeah. So in line 25, what would happen is it would clear. Now get to the end of the if statement, right? And my operation would stop. So my program would pause and wait for the next trigger. While it's waiting for the next button click, I would then go put a new value into that text box and press the button. So the button would take in that new value. After taking it in, it would clear the text box and then stop. So I would add a new value in the text box click on the button. The difference between an if statement and a while loop is an if statement will terminate, wait for me to change whatever I want to change, click on the button. A while loop runs continuously. It does not pause for you to change things. But if it's a text box that I'm using, I mean an input box that I'm using, an input box pops out and it pauses the program until you click OK or cancel. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions? So yeah, I think we've just done conversion from if statement to while loops. But ladies and gentlemen, this is most probably going to be, I'll get to you now, most probably going to be the last time I'm handling if statements, most probably going to be the last time I'm handling while loops. So please don't stare at me blankly. If you have any questions, please do ask. I don't have an issue going back and discussing any of the concepts that were covered today once again. What I don't want is later on for you to come into the practical session or into my office and start asking me questions, whereas now is the time to be asking questions and you are not. Yes, sir. Yes, line 23.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
You casted context string and then you casted string to number. What was happening?
So what data type is counter? It's an integer, right? What data type is this? It's a string, right? If I want to put counter in the same sentence as a string, what do I need to do? What do they have to have in common? They need to be compatible types. They need to be the same thing in order to be put in the same place, right? The string is already there. I want to add counter to that string. So in order to add counter to that string, what do I need to do to counter? I need to convert counter from an integer to a string, so it conforms along with the rest of the strings. The same thing with numbers, numbers. So basically over there, what I'm basically doing is I am producing that statement that says, please enter value 1 of 3. So 1 is counter, 3 is num values, is num numbers. Basically what I'm doing. You don't have to do that, by the way. You can just say, please enter value. This just makes it a little more informative for the user to know how far they've gone, how far they still have to go, and how many values they have left. So for instance, if I had 100 values, it would be very difficult to keep track of where I am. So for argument's sake, if I'm in the middle of this and I have a meeting or I have a call, when I come back, I might not know what was the last number I inputted. But if it's like this, I know exactly that I am at number 1 of 3. It's just making it a bit more informative for the user. It's not something that's going to get you more marks or something that's going to get you less marks. So for exams and for test and exam purposes, if you don't fully understand what I did there, it's equivalent to this. It's a nice to have. The thing where your text boxes changes color is nice to have. Is it worth marks? No, not specifically. Is it going to cost you marks? No, it will not. Does it make it easier for the person running the program to understand what they're doing? Yes, it does. So these two things fall under the same bracket. Line 22 is counter plus equal 1. Yes. So 22, counter plus equal 1 is the same as the shorthand for counter is equal to counter plus 1. It's the same thing. So again, if you don't understand or you don't feel comfortable with counter plus equal 1, you can just still do the old counter is equal to counter plus 1. It's the same thing. Okay, usually we would, I think Prof. Lung doesn't prefer the shorthand. So usually when we mark your exams, we know who taught you, depending on what kind of coding styles you do. And please, if you're going to be using counter plus equal 1, just make sure you pass, right? Because I don't want to say you're teaching this student is in your class, because we can tell by the way they coded, and you failed. You make me look bad. Yes.
What does the practical marker look at? Does it look at the neatness of the code?
Not necessarily the neatness, but as the lady in front mentioned earlier, we are looking at separation of concerns. Is your button not doing more than it should be doing, right? So making sure your initialization is in one button, your adding is in one button, all of those type of things, that is coding style, readability. Because right now, my code is very easy to read because you can see here are my variables, here are my input output variables, here are my other variables. Here is my initialization button where everything is being initialized to 0 and I'm getting my initial marks. Here is my telling you exactly what I'm doing in this button. I'm adding my values and there is more stuff there, output. And finally, here's my reset values button, which is basically going to be a replica of this. Put that there. I don't necessarily need that. That's what I don't need. Can remove that. And false. And hear that. Okay, so can you clearly tell what's going on? Got one button for initialization, one button for calculation and display, one button for output, right? That counts for coding style. I am letting you know at every stage, every point in time, what am I doing in each button. That's commenting, that's coding style. That's what that marker's for. Okay. And for certain things, like remember when I said, how do I solve that problem? The lady at the back said, you can just say counter plus 1. So when I see that you have counter plus 1 in that statement and you have counter plus 1 at the bottom, I can tell that you know what's going on, but it's redundant. Those two things are doing the same thing. So if I was your marker, I would take out 1 or 2 marks from coding style to go, it works, but you're doing the same thing over and over. So you don't really need to be doing that. So that would impact your coding style as well. So yeah, I've added my reset button. So if I say 3, add 1, 2, 3, my sum is 6. Reset, everything goes to 0. Okay, I need to reset something else. TXT. See now, as far as coding style is concerned, did you see that my prompt pops up even though I have not pressed the button again? You notice that? So that would be an issue. That would be a coding issue, but it's not really an issue because I think it falls in to go, here's my first number, second number, third number, and it says you can't add anymore. Okay, fine, cool. But if I click on it again, yeah, it's not really a problem. I'm okay with that. reset, everything's back to normal. Then I can say 5, for instance, initialize, add value 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can't add any more. My sum is 15. We're all happy. Okay, questions? Yeah. Read only by setting its properties, or just saying that text box read only is equal to true or read only is equal to false. Yeah, you can do it in properties, you can do it on the form. So if it's something you want to happen as during runtime, you'd have to do it in the form. I mean, in the code. If it's something that is going to be it's the same from the beginning, you can just set it in the properties. You wanted to read only. It's called read only. Read only, it should say read only is equal to false. So you just change false to true. Is there a point of value text box? At this point, no. At this point, I could ideally just remove this value text box. Let me do that before I confuse people. That kind of makes my thing look lopsided. Okay, there you go. It kind of looks a little bit better. Yes. How do you rename a project? Why do you want to rename a project? Yeah. It's difficult to rename a project. It's just easier to start over at this point. You can rename it, but it's quite a schlep. The chances of something going wrong are a lot. Yeah. So if you can just start over. Luckily for you guys, your code is not that complex. I mean, right now, this is one of the most complex things you're expected to do, and it took up less than 50 lines of code. And granted, most of those lines of code are comments and spaces, so it shouldn't be too much of a train smash to restart. What is that? What forces a while loop to end when the condition is no longer true? So in this case, our while loop is going to run for as long as counter is less than numbers. But every single time the loop runs, counter increments by 1. So eventually counter is going to be equal to numbers, and it makes my condition no longer true. Then my while loop stops running. Yes?
In our research class, we have to initialize TXT numbers with only false.
Why do we have to initialize?
TXT numbers with only false.
I can't hear the last part of your question.
Line 44.
Line 44, yes. Why do you have to reinitialize the? Because remember, when I ran it the first time, so again, these things are on the realm of you do not need to do this. This is just me trying to be fancy. You don't really need to do this. But you notice now if I say I want 3 numbers and initialize, do you see that the text box turns gray? So I can't add any more numbers to this. So if I'm resetting and the read only is still set on, I won't be able to change that value. So that's why I'm saying switch off the read only and allow me to put information in there. Because right now it's read only, I can't add anything in there. If I click on reset, I can add something in there. Initialize, now I can't add anything. Reset, now I can add a value in there. Does that make sense?
So if, like we initialize TXT numbers or text to nothing.
Yes.
So if we had done that, does that mean our new code, our new numbers will be added to the previous number?
Oh, it wouldn't. So if I didn't do that, If I didn't do that and I said, I want 3 numbers, initialize, and then I said reset, you see that it allows me to enter information, but that 3 from the last time is still there. So I'm just, by clearing it, I'm just making sure that I don't need to have to do this. I don't need to have to delete that in order to put another value. So 7, initialize, reset. Now I need to clear that 7 and put in another value. So one more step. The clearing is one more step. I'm just getting the computer to clear it on my behalf so that I don't have to do it. Okay. Sir, is it still okay to initialize my counter is equal to 1 and then change the while condition to less than or equal to? For now it is, but eventually I'm going to give you remember the number lines lecture where I told you what is inclusive and what is exclusive. So if I give you that and I say and I say numbers is not inclusive, and you do less than or equal, you're not answering the question. So you're going to lose marks for that, because although it may run because you've made your counter start at 1, you are not answering the question because the question said a certain number needs to be inclusive. So I'd say rather stop doing that. Okay, any other questions? No, let's try and see if you can't change this anymore. So value, the issue that we're discussing this morning is, are we keeping track of value 1, 2, and 3? No, we're not. Do you want to keep, and we want to keep value 1, 2, and 3. So what I'm going to do is, come on. So I already have the UJ grid installed here. Drag it, drop it. This is what a UJ grid looks like. So now I am going to, in add value, I'm going to change value from a single value to an array. Why am I setting it an array without a number? Why am I creating a dynamic array? I don't know how big it's going to be, right? I can't tell it how big it's going to be because I don't know how big it's going to be. The idea is the moment you know how big it's going to be, you resize it. So after getting numbers from the user, I can simply resize the array and I read them. Oh, there's no S there. Actually, I should call it values because it's multiple now. And in here, I would say value at C. Okay, so to the person who asked if I can start counter at 1, you might have an issue when it comes to this because now we are, it shouldn't necessarily be an issue. Never mind. Okay, so basically I converted it into an array, storing all of the indexes, and I'm adding them up. It shouldn't change any of my code. I mean, shouldn't change any of my logic. Let me run it again. How many values? 3 values. 1, 2, 3. Still 6. The only difference is now about storing those numbers. Some people look very confused. Who's very confused? Which part is confusing you? I haven't done anything with the UJ grid as yet. I just dragged and dropped it. I haven't touched it. Yes. No, I haven't done anything with the UJ grid as yet. The only thing I did is convert my single variable to an array and store those values. So I haven't touched the grid at all. So don't worry about the grid as yet. Because when I ran it as well, nothing happened in the grid. You didn't see anything in the grid, right? So don't worry about the grid. Right now, it's just the conversion from a single variable to an array. Are we all comfortable with that? Okay. Now, when it comes to the grid, that's a different thing altogether. So the grid needs a name. So properties, grid name. Where art thou name? Okay. So a grid, just like everything else, has its own prefix, and the prefix for grid is GRD. So it's GRD display. Good. So we all know how grids work, right? They have rows, they have columns, right? Okay. So in this point, as soon as I know the resizing of the grid, I can resizing of the array, I can resize grid. Okay. So GRD display dot, how many columns do we want to have? Columns are the ones that stand like this. Columns. How many columns do we want? 2. How many columns do we have in the grid already? 2. So we're going to leave it as 2. How many rows do we want? We want numbers number of rows, right? Numbers plus 1. So it would be numbers plus 1, and then GRD. No. Row 1. Row column 1. That should say row column 0. That should just say count. Let's see if that works. So my aim for now is just to confuse the crap out of you. So we've got 3 initialized. Oh, there we go. So now I've got 3. Now it says index value, right? The index of the value itself. Add value, the first one is 1, 2, 3. So there we have it. Index 1 has the value 1. Index 2 has the value 2. Index 3 has the value 3. And now you're going, no, it doesn't, because you just put the same numbers in there. So okay, I can't reinitialize. Start. Five numbers, initialize. Now it's resized to 5 numbers. Add values. Give me a number. 20. Give me a number. 10. Give me a number. 15. 7 and 35. There you go. So at this point, index number 1 in my array has value 20. Index number 2 in my array has value 10. Index 3 in my array has value 15. Index 4 in my array has value 7. Index 5 in my array has value 35. So how do you write to a grid? So at the end of the day, I said, how many rows do I want? I want num numbers plus 1. Why do I want num numbers plus 1? I want the number of numbers, but I still want one where I'm going to put the title of this column. Can you see that? Okay. So then from there, how do you talk to it? You talk to it by saying which row, which column, and what do you want to put in that row and column. So in row 0, column 0, I want to write index. In row 0, column 1, I want to write value. And if we scroll all the way down, I'm saying in row counter, counter is going to go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in row counter, column 1, I want to store the value that's in the array. I want to display the value that's in the array. In row counter, column 0, I want to just store counter. Counter again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in column 0, that's where I have my rows. And in column 1, that's where I have in column 0, that's where I have my index. In column 1, that's where I have my values. And that's how this happened. Any questions? Yes. We're almost out of time. Why do I put counter inside the array? Because I'm trying to keep track of where I am in the array. So this values at counter is what is inside my array at this index. So when counter is 1, I'm saying go into my array and get me the value that's in the first index of the array. Go into my array, get the second, third, fourth, fifth. How many of you are still excited to be doing this module? Okay, cool. Yeah, we're out of time. I'll see you guys next week. Don't worry too much about the array part. We were just doing that because we had time. I'm still going to teach you and create slides for you guys, and we'll have more than enough time to go through it before your next practical is due.